is the Sattler File.
Welcome back. Talking business stuff, of course, well, makes the world go round, really. And Jamie Holroyd from Stratosfear joins me. How are you, James?
I'm terrific to say, actually. I'm glad to be back. This is my second week in the chair, so
excellent.
Had a great time last week, and let's hope we have another good one today.
We'll try and be gentle with you.
Thank you.
Currently, the market, there's all sorts of talk about the market at the moment, about it's tough and it's this and it's that, and there's all this debate about GST and, you know, interest rates and China, and it's just stuff everywhere. And even certainly for business people, but even for the general punter, it's really confusing, you know, as to where we are really placed at the moment.
Yeah, look, one of the things we've been talking about for a long period of time is if you go back to the onset of the GFC, which is now, 7-8 years ago, and there's been so much government intervention in the economy, low interest rates, stimulus spending, quantitative easing. There's so much interference in the economy that nobody actually knows what the real level of demand is, and I think that's what adds to this great sort of sense of uncertainty.
Does that include, because to me, I mean, I guess, I probably come from a little bit more of a creative side of things, but there's a pragmatism to my thinking as well. To me, numbers are numbers, and yes, you can interpret numbers differently, but the variation, like even within the government, but certainly government departments and then the opposition and then the media and everyone else, they're all looking at the same numbers, and yet they've all got different outlooks and different perspectives on it. How does that work?
Oh, look, I think it's like most things. A lot of people have different perspectives depending on where they're coming from.
Their agenda,
Each political party can take the same set of numbers and distort them completely.
So including lobby groups and self-interest groups and that sort of stuff, because obviously someone like, say, ACOS, for instance, will have a totally different perspective to the trade unions, who will have a different perspective to the Chamber of Commerce, for instance.
Well, I think, too, there's a community expectations, and certainly the welfare groups, for example. So ACOS is a great example, but in the original GST debate, they had a disproportionate view, disproportionate say, and with all respect to some parties, it's not unusual for people to talk and not really be very informed, and there's a whole bunch of distortions. And the GST is a classic example in terms of what it means for the economy and what people try and paint it as meaning for the average punter. So.
Well, I obviously need to get out more because I've watched a little bit of Question Time today. And I hate to admit that because that just shows exactly where my life has deteriorated to. We talked earlier actually off air about watching boring movies. I mean, that'd be an upgrade on Question Time. But I noticed that the scare campaign about the GST continues, and today's one that was rolled out, which was, as it tends to be, was pretty effectively just smacked away by Turnbull. He's got a very smug look on his face at the moment about dealing with these things. But even the talk about GST on rent, on just home rentals, the Labor Party threw that up as, can you rule that out? Now, they've done that in the context of saying, well, everything's on the table. There's talk about everything on the table for the tax debate. So therefore the GST, which you would expect includes things like capital gains and superannuation and the Labor Party asks a very specific question is, can you rule out a GST increase on rent? Well, to me, and not taking political sides, but just in terms of listening to that as a question, that's a stupid question.
Oh, look, and then their question's designed to unnerve and unsettle people, and
but it's not doing it.
Well, and look, I think that's a great credit. Both, Malcolm Turnbull has his supporters and his knockers, right? And I would like to give him some points for having the courage so early on to take on this debate, because it is a difficult one. It is full of scare campaigns. Any economist worth their salt will tell you that the GST is a very efficient way to raise taxes. You can easily redistribute to assist the people who might be disadvantaged, and what you've got to compare it to is what is the alternative. So if you're against the GST or against a rise in the GST, you're actually for payroll tax, you're for stamp duty.
Well, that's an interesting point, isn't it? Because there's still a whole bunch of those sorts of taxes that still exist, in terms, particularly at state level, that supposedly were going to go as a result of the GST. But the GST obviously hasn't done the job at the 10% level when you combine it with the GFC and all the other stuff that's gone on. It hasn't raised enough revenue, or the downturn has been such that it's impacted as well. So they're sitting there saying, well, we may need to increase from 10% to 15%, broaden the base, do whatever. And you're right. I mean, there has to be some compensatory sort of packages for those that are hardest hit. But logic sort of says that a consumption-based tax has to be better than one you can actually wriggle out of by having better accountants.
Yeah, no, certainly. And look, I don't think it's just, we paint this sort of class warfare of the rich people paying no tax, which is, to say that they pay no tax is a bit misleading. But look, I use a very simplified example, and I hope people can sort of appreciate this. I'm the local drug dealer, right? And I sell my wares and I make a lot of money. I'm not really filling out a tax return and, paying my fair share of tax. But when I make that money, I still have to go down the shop and buy some milk, right? And if I'm paying 10% GST on my milk, well, I'm actually getting caught up in the tax system. So that's one of the benefits. The other thing is this sense that the GST is regressive, right? Now, they say there's lies, damn lies, and then after that comes statistics.
Yeah.
Now, I'm sure if you went to Malcolm Turnbull's house and opened the cupboards and looked at his cupboard and helped yourself to get something to eat, it wouldn't be exactly the same as your elderly grandmother's pantry cupboard when she's on the pension.
You expect not.
So the fact that wealthy people spend more on food means in absolute terms they'd actually be paying more tax. So if you exempt food from the GST, you're actually assisting the rich more than you're hurting the poor. So,
yeah.
And then there's one of these arguments that I think we've probably lacked over the last 10 years particularly. We've lacked leaders that can cut through with a message. And there's been a really lazy effort at reform, and it's kind of been sprung on people and surprised on people rather than, which I think is what the government's trying to do at the moment, is have a dialogue and have a conversation with the community.
But it's been symptomatic of politics in the past 20 years, hasn't it? That it's all about the election cycle. That this idea of a 10-year plan even, or a 5-year plan, which is actually outside the election cycle. It's all about getting re-elected. Well, that's certainly the perception, and you sort of think that these harder long-term decisions, which something like a revision of the tax system, I mean, that's a 20, 30, 50-year impact on the marketplace, as opposed to let's throw $10 million at a powerful lobby group and satisfy them so that they say that the government's good and we get re-elected.
Yeah, look, again, I think it's where you get the interaction of changes in community, changes in media, social media, changes in political tactics. So there certainly was a sense at one stage is that you get as much benefit from announcing something as you do as doing it. So all you got to do is announce things and never do them. Right? Now that works for a while, but it won't work forever, and then it catches up with you.
Yes.
Now, if you look at the GST, it was first floated in the 70s. Paul Keating had a crack at it early in the Hawke-Keating era.
Yep.
John Huston took it to an election in 93, and it wasn't until 2001 that actually came in. So you're talking 20 odd years.
I mean, Huston pretty much blew it on that. I still recall the conversation about the cake, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And just a simple question that he just couldn't answer, and that sort of unravelled the whole thing. I mean, Hewson wasn't a great leader at the best of times, but that seemed to sort of unhinge that whole debate.
I'm sure he'd like his time again.
Yeah.
Again, his simple answer should have been, at the most it'll cost you 15%. We should have left it at that. But he tried so hard to explain it that he just confused the community. And you talk about moments of truth, and I think Mike Willisey who was conducting the interview.
That's right, yes.
You could see the look on his face. He's like, I've got one of those moments right in front of me right now. And it is a point where the community says, well, do I have confidence in this? I trust you that this is going to be the right thing for me. And if you struggle to explain it, then maybe it's not.
Yeah, and I guess, again, about leadership qualities, Hewson didn't have that leadership quality where you could have a lot of confidence. One expects in the current marketplace, Shorten will never have it. He to me, and again, that it's apolitical, this comment, but Shorten is a dead man walking. He can't win an election.
I think the challenge in the last, say, 10 years is we've had people who can't carry an argument, right? So if you look at even the mining tax, the carbon tax, these were kind of thrusted upon people. There was no 5, 10, 15-year conversation. So the community says, look, I think when the GST came in, people said, look, I'm not sure we like this, but we understand it's probably required. Yeah. And you know what? We're going to give you a go. And it came in. It wasn't the big scary thing. I know myself. I remember just before the GST came in. I need a new pair of shoes. And I thought, I've got to run down and buy those shoes because they'll be dearer tomorrow. And then I was very disappointed when I got to the shoe shop the next day because I ran out of time that day. They were the same price.
Yeah.
So it's not quite the scary thing that people believe. The other thing in terms of economic and political history lesson is that we're talking about a 15% GST. That's exactly what John Hewson was talking about. We're 22 years down the track talking about what was proposed then.
It is bizarre how things eventually sort of almost come into vogue, almost or reach their time.
Well, their time comes.
Yeah.
And there's certainly a few issues like that at the moment for sure.
So overall, economically, there sort of seems to be this perception that we're doing it really, really tough. But then there's other people sort of trying to talk it up and saying it's not that bad. How is it really?
Oh, look, it's harder. There's no doubt. It's harder. But look, one of my arguments always is, and I've certainly worked in tough markets. So, I'm from Victoria originally. I've been in Perth now for 15 years. We've certainly ridden the wave for the last 10 years, that's for sure. But before that time, I worked in a corporate office in Geelong. After the recession, right? You couldn't get a tougher market, right?
Yeah,
you might
sure.
recall they had the pyramid collapse, they had the Capital Building Society collapse, but there is opportunity if you want to go and find it. Now, at that stage, we certainly focused on the surfwear industry. So there's those, iconic brands, iconic Australian brands down in Torquay. There's Rip Curl and Quicksilver, Oakley, Reef Brazil, the sandals people, and those people were killing it.
Yeah.
And you talk about during the recession and telling people we're going to focus on clothing and retail. I thought you were mad, right? But those businesses grew incredibly quickly, and I think that was great for me as a young person to be exposed to that.
Why did they, contrary to the overall economic market?
Look, I think what they did was they didn't stick by the rules that everyone else was playing with. They were sort of pretty cool at the time. The timing was good. They were a little bit irreverent. They were away from all the sort of noise everywhere else and just got on with it. And the thing that sort of troubles me as an Australian is there's not a lot of great Australian brands. If you go through the AS6, there's not a lot of big Australian companies. Even our car companies are foreign owned. Yeah. They're all packing up and going home soon. But, the surfwear brands and a few others, Westfarmers is a great Australian company, but there's not a lot.
But that's symptomatic. I mean, we're in a much more of a world economy than we were 10, 20 years ago, 30 years ago especially. And you've got the same, that you don't have many Perth-based companies anymore. They've been swallowed up into national companies. So logic sort of says those national companies, when they become successful, or when an opportunity exists to swallow them up, they'll get swallowed up on a world level.
Yeah, the thing in Perth particularly, it's hard to run a national business from Perth. We don't have a massive population, which means it's hard to run a large-scale retail operation. So we tend to be fairly focused around, mining resources and property. So, yeah.
The dominance, and going off track a little bit here, but it's sort of all relevant, I guess. The dominance of the big players, say, for instance, in the retail market, so you talk Coles and Woolworths in particular, because you mentioned Westfarmers. Woolworths seems to be in a really weird place. I mean, they're sitting there losing, squillions of dollars through Masters, and yet there's an announcement last week that there's a new merger possibly coming up between Mitre 10 and Home Hardware to build another super hardware brand to go up against Bunnings, when the one that they've actually already involved in, although they do, they have got ownership involved with Home and Mitre 10. Isn't working. It's a dismal failure. That seems to be a weird sort of position they're in. Yeah, no, certainly. Look, there's always two issues. The first one is strategy, and the second one is execution. So, is the strategy actually correct? So, I'm sure what's happening. I'm no expert on what's happening at Woolworths, but they're saying, well, Westfarmers via Bunnings are killing it, right? They're expanding all around the country. They're doing really well. That's a market we need to be part of. We can't let our number one competitor dominate us like that. This is a market that we need to be part of. So that's clearly part of their strategy. Then it comes down to the execution. Now, it might be that to build a presence and to build a new brand against a dominant market player, well, maybe you are going to lose money for a number of years. And if that's what you're prepared to do, and if you see the long-term benefit in it, then that's fine. But what you don't want to do is get to the end and have the strategy completely wrong. So, and it's always a challenge. It's a challenge of judgment. So, Those two players in particular, so let's talk Coles and Woolworths as opposed to Wesfarmers and ownership and stuff, but the dominance that they've got with the fuel market, they're now involved in the finance market, insurance, hardware obviously, all that sort of stuff. Is that, is there an upside for the market having that sort of dominance?
Look, it depends. I have a really simple view on life. If someone has disproportionate market power, and it doesn't matter whether they're Coles or Woolworths, or whether they're, the government, the police, the priest, whoever, if you give someone enormous power, the temptation to abuse it is enormous, right? And you just want to have enough checks and balances in place to make sure that's not the case.
So when things get tough, you mentioned here about an Apple example. I mean, things get tough. What do? I mean, the temptation for most companies over the years is things get tough, you bunker down, you cut your marketing budget, you get rid of staff. That you can see the merit in that thinking, but in actual fact, you can't grow from that point by doing that.
You can't shrink your way to greatness, right? And there is a time when you need to adjust and, you need to survive. That's obvious statement number one. But there is always opportunity. And the example with Apple that you mentioned, I remind people, when I'm now 45, when I went to high school, the Apple IIe was suddenly in all the schools. And then it's like Apple evaporated off the face of the earth, right? It was nowhere to be seen. It's kind of like Apple was something that just geeky design people had, and they clung to it, and no one else really used it. And it wasn't really until the iPod, but then the iPhone, which really relaunched Apple in a serious way. And I remind people that the iPhone was launched in the middle of the GFC. Right? Now, it was an innovative product. It added to productivity and efficiency, and because it had those benefits, it was able to do well in a really tough market. The world certainly didn't need another phone, right? But it still doesn't. I get amazed. I walk down the street often and there's queues of people. I think, what are they all doing? And they're queued up at the shop for some new phone, which I still don't know what it does compared to the first one. But
No, I know. As things get tough for a business, as they inevitably do, particularly small business, it's a very, very tough industry to be in, being in a small business. Things start to get tough. They tend to spiral. They tend to sort of manifest themselves a bit, and because of the stress and the pressure and the insular nature that you're in a small business, where you haven't got that support mechanism around you, and you haven't got a chief financial officer, and you haven't got a legal officer, and you haven't got this, and you haven't got that to call on. What do you do? How do you cover yourself when you're in that
this
situation?
Is a bit of an issue we touched on last week. The pressure and stress of being in a small business is enormous, and the lack of avenues to talk to someone about it. There's clearly a business model there for someone who wants to start a business counselling service for sure. But as I said, you don't want to talk to your spouse. It gets a bit tough. It's not really want to air your sort of business laundry in front of your friends and family. So it is difficult. The best advice is to go and seek professional advice. So don't let it spiral out of control. And I always think it's like a health issue. If you've got a symptom, go to the doctor and understand what it is. Don't wait until you're really sick to find out that something really serious that could have been dealt with at the start.
But it's terminal, Yeah,
absolutely. And we do a lot of turnaround work, and we just wish that we'd been involved earlier. And that's the greatest compliment we get from the clients we work with, is that when they say, look, we wish we had come to you earlier. Now, there's a natural hesitation for people to seek out advice. There's only a very small minority of people who will proactively go and find it. And that number is typically around 3 to 5%. And they're the people who know what they want, they know what they're after, they've got a really clear objective, and they're going to bring in the best advice they can to help execute on it. So.
Well, I guess, the pressure does become a little bit self-fulfilling in the sense that, you're in trouble, so you're so focused on trying to fix the problem. Finding a solution, but I know from personal experience, finding who it is that can actually help you is another story. That's, because, and we've discussed it a number of times on here about, business coaches, for instance. I mean, business coaches is a wonderful concept, but there's an awful lot of business coaches that don't necessarily have those sorts of skills and talents to be able to help you if you're really in trouble. They can get you to, do what coaches do. They can get you to do more of this and more of that, more of the other thing. But they're not necessarily people that are skilled in trouble times when things are not going right. which then puts you in a bit of a difficult situation. Where do you find that help? Not and again, speaking from personal experience, it's not about do I need help. It's not about what help do I need. It's where the hell do I get it?
Yeah. Well, they can ring Stratosfear, that's for sure.
Yeah, good lead in.
Ring us, and if we're busy, we can certainly put you onto someone else. But there are plenty of people around. But the challenge is, if this is not an area where I have background in, when I speak to someone who I think might be able to help me, are they the right person? Right? So do they have the depth and breadth of skills? So we had a really interesting debate recently about, let's say I'm a company director of a listed company, and that company gets itself into financial trouble, or even it falls over. Right? Now, that person's career as a director of a listed company becomes fairly limited. They're seen as failed. That person has the skills now and the experience, which would be of enormous benefit if that ever happened again. But really what you're going to do is put on your whole board people who don't have that skills and experience, because those people might be seen as tarnished. So sometimes these things are really counterintuitive. The other thing that's interesting, when a business gets in trouble, so let's say it's marginally profitable, or maybe even it's losing money, its working capital's drying up, the bank doesn't want to lend it them any more money, and the intuitive sense is to go out and have some discounts, run some promotions, and try and grow your way out of trouble. Now, the difficulty when you do that is growing a business often takes a lot of cash.
Yes.
So sometimes it's about shrinking your way out of trouble, which is something that people don't normally think of, and it is counterintuitive. But it might be, maybe we need to get rid of our customers that don't make us much money. Maybe we need to shrink our operations for a while and rebuild our margins and rebuild our proposition.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
The issue of solvency and the definition of solvency and such is a pretty grey one, and it's one that is waved as a great big baseball bat over company directors and business operators and such. And of course there's that what's that wonderful statement about solvency, about reasonable expectation. That's got to be one of the greyest phrases in the history of the universe, I would think, in business. Whatever the hell reasonable expectation means. And if you ask 10 people, you get 10 different answers without question. If someone's in trouble, how do they really determine whether, what action they need to take in terms of solvency?
Well, look, I come back to, you ask 10 people, you get 10 opinions, right? There'll be the optimist who says, no, you're fine, right? You've got X, Y, and Z's about to happen, and if those things happen, we should be okay. Then you'll get someone who has a complete legalistic thing, says, no, you should stop tomorrow. In fact, you should have stopped last week.
Yeah.
I think you can only take the best advice and then act on what you feel comfortable with. If you do feel comfortable that you will be able to, in the short term, continue to pay your bills, that you're not going to incur debts that you have no hope of repaying, then clearly it's worth continuing. But you do need to be careful, and you do need to get the right advice. So, and often I think that one of the challenges is businesses that get themselves in trouble don't have good financial information. They don't have timely information, it's not detailed, and it's often sometimes not accurate. So, you can't make those kind of critical decisions without having good information.
Yeah, fair call. A lot of businesses over New Year, Christmas, that sort of period, seems to create a problem. What's that about?
Yeah, and we've all seen the movies and heard the stories where, people get dismissed on Christmas Eve, and which you'd like to think is, makes a great movie, but it does happen, right? And
Chevy Chase springs to mind.
Yeah. Well, a couple of years ago, someone said to me, you must be fairly winding down for Christmas. And I said, well, in fact, it's always the complete opposite. We actually get really, really incredibly busy at Christmas time. And so there's a couple of reasons for that. One is, for most businesses, it's their peak time of year. You also have a lot of staff taking holidays, so you pay those holidays pay in advance.
Yep.
In addition, there's at least 3 public holidays, which you then have to pay for without any productivity. Add to that a lot of banks might have repayments scheduled half yearly, and they might have their financial covenants that have to be met half yearly. The other thing is, if you have your clients who are in any sort of financial trouble, what everyone tries to do is just sneak away on holidays and I might get 6 or 7 weeks respite before I have to pay my own bills.
Yeah, because I'll be away till the 15th of January or something. Yeah.
So you add that together and you get the perfect storm, and that's why you have this disproportionate amount of failures typically around Christmas.
Also stock holdings, I suppose, because you're carrying so much stock in the lead up to Christmas, if you're that sort of business, that all of a sudden your inventory has gone up through the roof, which, of course, that has an impact on your cash flow and so on. So, it's another factor.
Well, look, and the truth is that people start planning for this about a week before Christmas. We every year in October, we send out a note to remind people of what we call the Grinch that stole Christmas, to make sure that he doesn't steal yours and to plan ahead. So one of the big things that we try to emphasise to all our clients is make sure that you have a liquidity buffer. You don't want to be stretched so tight that if something goes wrong, you have no sort of safety valve. So
yeah. Very good call. We'll come back and talk about business a little bit more very shortly with Jamie. We'll take a quick break and be back with more very shortly here on the Sattler Files.
This is the Sattler Files.
DevWright Homes, when you're looking for attention to detail and a uniquely designed home to suit all your needs. At DevWright Homes, we only build a limited number of homes per year, so we can truly focus on what you want out of a prestige home builder. We've continually won awards for excellence, with a record number of wins last year and the proud winner of the Australian Townhouse Villa of the Year. While we love building homes to suit each client, we pride ourselves on designing homes that take into account the special safety needs of some of our clients. If you have a dream, we can make it come true. Talk to Jay Mangano and find out more about DevWright Homes at www.devwright.com.au.
A kiss, a long embrace, a fond farewell should be personal. That's why Perslow Funerals allow you to remember the life of your loved ones in a way that truly reflects their individual character. It's the difference that makes every goodbye unique. For more information about planning a special goodbye, visit perslowfunerals.com.au, because every goodbye is different.
I'm John Hughes. I'm very proud of the tremendous amount of repeat and referral business that we do in Victoria Park, and this is because I've personally trained all of my salespeople to be non-pushy, friendly and professional, and to always provide first-class before and after-sales service. I jealously safeguard my reputation, so if you want the best car buying experience in WA, choose your dealer before you choose your car. That's John Hughes in Victoria Park. DL 6061.
Is there anything more confusing than the world of finance? Why would you risk managing your own financial affairs without the help of a professional? But you don't want to talk to just anyone. You want financial advice that is both comprehensive and objective. That's what you get from Paramount Wealth Management. As a fee-based firm with no institutional ties, you can be sure that what you get from Paramount is all about your interests and not those of a financial institution. Call Paramount today on 9474 3522 or visit www.paramount.net.au.
This is the Sattler Files.
Welcome back. Talking business matters with Jamie from Stratosfear, and we're covering all sorts of topics and such to do with the effective operation of a business, and also if you do get into trouble. One of the business operations that there's legendary stories about is family businesses, and the talk about sons and grandsons and different generations losing fortunes and all that sort of stuff. There's an inherent trap with family businesses, isn't there? Because there's an expectation automatically.
Look, family business, and particularly intergenerational family businesses, is a very interesting field of study. So I'm sure most of the listeners have probably heard the saying that the first generation establishes it, the second generation grows it, and the third one loses it.
Yes, so, which has been proven on big scale a few times.
Well, it certainly happens, but I think the thing that people get lost a little bit on is that, well, there's not a lot of businesses that last for 60, 70, 80, 100 years, right? So
I think the one that springs to mind, I think, was Warwick Fairfax, wasn't it? That's the one that jumps out off the page.
That is a classic tale, yes.
Yeah. Whereas you look at the Packer situation, that's not the case at all. It's changed direction dramatically. But James Packer seems to be doing okay.
Yeah, well, a casino is a model that you don't have a lot of cost, and
No.
So yeah, but you know, again, that business has transitioned. If you said, is it a true third generation family business? Well, it's not the sort of media business that it was. So again, that's probably an example where it's evolved.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that can happen if you're talking a third generation business is it might be so wedded to tradition that it doesn't evolve and it doesn't adapt. So
The old, that's the way we've always done it sort of mentality.
yeah, and as I said, you have a sort of history around your product or service, whatever it might be, and maybe that's what you know. And the taxi industry at the moment is a classic example where it has to deal with this left field competitor in Uber that it wasn't expecting or planning for. Now, what it does going forward is going to be really interesting. So,
Well, I guess in fairness, and you know, looking at both sides, I mean, it's probably fair they weren't expecting it, given that it's illegal. But you know, that's a fair call to sort of have apprehensions about it. But yeah, it's caught it off guard terribly, and the reaction to it has been pretty disjointed.
less than ideal.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And,
but you know, if you looked at the example of, say, sort of the Kodak film business, it was completely blindsided by the advent of digital photography.
Yes.
So these things happen all the time, and you know, you have to constantly be on the lookout for what are they going to be. Now, when you're wedded to the history, you're probably not looking as innovative as new players coming into the market who might be on a new idea and running off in a completely different direction. So,
But not just generational, but also family businesses where, couples or, father and son are actually running it in conjunction with each other. They can get a bit tricky too, can't it?
yeah, look, there's a whole bunch of intricacies that are not there in a normal business, right? So let's say I work with my wife, which I happen to do, is that the relationship is not as it would be with an employee, right? So you might be far more strict with someone and say, do this, do that. Well, because that relationship has another dimension to it, your ability to give those orders is somewhat compromised. And it might be that the son doesn't listen to the father, where he might have listened to someone else.
Or the son is as generations happen, they have different set of social values, they have a different set of life values and such, and maybe, look at things a bit differently. And, you see it sort of, I suppose, stereotyped a little bit in television quite often, where the son will come up with some ideas and the father will go, no, that's garbage, son, it's not how we do it, and that sort of thing. And in actual fact, he may well be right, but because of that relationship between the two, the ideas don't get heard and that sort of thing.
Well, the opposite might also be true too, where you might have one generation telling the other generation what to do. They don't quite listen, and so then all the staff say, "Well, there's a different set of rules for one person than there is for others," and it becomes quite difficult to manage because the cultural expectations about what's required and what's expected can be compromised. Not always, and we tend to focus on the examples. I mean, certainly there's a fantastic third-generation family business out there, no doubt. So
how do you best deal with that situation? If you've got either a family or a multi-generational business, how do you manage those expectations better?
Look, I think it's about having clarity. So if I'm in a business and I'm working both with the father and the son, who am I taking orders from, right? And that sets up that sort of what I call the political tensions where it's not clear. Now, where there's not clarity, there's not certainty. Yes. It makes it quite difficult to manage. So sometimes it's got to be put back on the people to say, well, who am I actually reporting to? Who do I actually listen to? What happens if one compromises the other?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Moving on to a different topic, there's an interesting one, a rocket theory. What is that?
Well, this is the Stratosfear rocket theory.
Yep.
So we call it the rocket theory mainly because we drew it and it looked like a rocket, and that kind of fitted really well with the whole Stratosfear logo and Stratosphere theory. But basically, about 15 years ago, I went to a presentation and it was given by an accounting firm, and they ran through what was basically a gap analysis tool.
Yep.
So it had about 10 or 12 different topic areas, and under each of 10 or 12 of those topic areas it had 10 or 12 questions, and then you rate all these questions out of 10 and you come up with a score, and it does all these magical things. And I left thinking, wow, that's really impressive. Right? That would be really helpful. And then I went home and made some notes, and after about 3 hours of playing with these notes, I just threw it all in the bin and said, that's all great and it looks great, but I don't know any business that ever worked like that. So what we came up with was, which is now the rocket theory, but basically it's got three main premises. One is the capital structure of the business, which I call the foundation. The second is what I call the engine. So that's the operations, the process, the people, the leadership. And the third is the sales front end. Now, ironically, you would think that most businesses are pretty good at all three, right? It's only three areas. Mm-hmm. But if you think of an example, like an accounting firm. An accounting firm is technically very competent, and it probably is structured very well in terms of its capital base and risk management, but it's probably not very good at sales. Right? Alternatively, if you think of a telco company, probably fantastic at sales, maybe hopeless at operations, and even worse in terms of its capital structure. So if you can find a business that ticks all three of those boxes, it's probably going to outperform.
Makes sense.
From our point of view, we get involved with a lot of early-stage companies, innovation companies and the like, and giving advice to people like that. If we can plug, if it's got two of the components and we can plug the third, there's a fair chance it's probably going to outperform.
So by saying plug the third, how do you deal with that?
So it might be, for example, say the accounting firm, that we might be able to run a strategic sales management process for them, embed that in the culture, and then have an accounting firm that would outperform all others. Or it might be that someone's got a great idea and they've got a great operations, but they just lack the capital. So if we have enough confidence around the first two and we can structure it appropriately, maybe we can find the capital for it where it couldn't find otherwise. So that's really the Stratosfear model, is how do you get things to outperform? How do you find something where you can tweak, or what we call augment the management, or augment the capital base and allow it to outperform? So,
in terms of, I suppose those three aspects, is there an order that you should pay attention to them? Because it's pretty hard. I mean, they're three big areas. So to actually pay attention to all three simultaneously is difficult.
Yeah, look, what the truth is businesses will exist because they're naturally good at one or two, right? So it's not like you have to fix all three. So, if the business was hopeless at all of them, it probably wouldn't exist. It wouldn't exist for very long, right?
Good point,
you normally got something to work with.
Yeah.
But really what it comes down to, it's the willingness of the management and the leadership to A, seek advice, but then B, listen to it. So,
is that a challenge in the marketplace? Because leadership is a word that gets thrown around. Again, back to the business coaching thing, they talk about leadership all the time. The whole leadership thing about what a good leader is. Traditionally, you've got guys. Let's say was a great mechanic for a big car yard or whatever it is, and decides that, bugger this, having a boss, I'm going to go out and set my own business up, doesn't automatically make him a good businessman. He's still just a good mechanic. Now, obviously, some succeed, some don't. One expects it gets down to their business skills or who they surround themselves with, or whatever it may be. That willingness of a leader that's got his own vision of his own business and what it is and why he did it and what he wants it to be and all that sort of stuff. How much do they get in the way of taking advice, and two, being a good leader?
Well, look, there's probably two issues which I'll address separately there. Now, it's better to have a second-rate plan that works than a first-rate plan that doesn't. Right?
Yes.
Now, so if you look at the political scene at the moment, so Tony Abbott's gone and Malcolm Turnbull's in. Is there a great deal of difference? Well, it's probably some tweaking, and it's probably more around the communication. Now, if you've got great plans and great ideas, but no one's listening, well, you're not really going to get very far. So often, I think what happens is some people can overcomplicate things. And if you make it so complicated that people can't understand, or they don't buy in, or they don't listen, then it makes it incredibly challenging. So what we try and do is we always try and bring things back to a one-pager. How do we get back to a one-pager? Because you have to simplify it to get it on one page. Now, the fact that it's simplified doesn't mean it's simple. Often, you've got to go through an incredible amount of complexity to get back to something that's pretty simple.
Correct. That makes sense.
The second part that you mentioned is the technician being a business owner. Now, this is a real challenge because people often start a business because they're passionate about what they do. I might be passionate about being a carpenter or a plumber. Or
there's sort of two types, isn't there? They're the ones that are passionate about it, or the ones that just don't want to answer to someone else. They're the because really that's things like franchises, for instance, are very often sold on that basis. Don't have a boss. You don't have someone to answer to. In actual fact, you do. You've got the franchise to answer to, but that's sort of the basis that they sell it on. You don't need the industry experience. You don't need that passion, but you can be your own boss. Yeah,
certainly. Well, look, we've got great issues running everywhere, so I'll just try and track down one or two of them. But one of the challenges that we see, we get involved with a lot of fantastic businesses that we would love to work with, right? They've got great opportunity and we can see that they're headed for issues. And the challenge is often convincing those people of what can be brought to it. Now, as we do our own research and our own study into, our own business and how effective it is, why don't some of those people do what we think is required? Now, one of the answers we came to is they started a business because they don't like to answer to anybody else, right?
Yes.
So that's one of the great challenges for us. So, yeah.
In terms of understanding business, again, use the motor mechanic example. He doesn't necessarily know about accounting procedures and know about financial literacy, as we've talked about, that sort of stuff. How do you do it? Do you compensate for your deficiencies, and let's use that word advisedly, but compensate for your deficiencies by just getting good advice, or do you really need to get your knowledge base up?
I think the truth is you can't be an expert at everything, but as a business owner, you've got to be a good generalist. You've got to have enough awareness to say, this advice I'm getting sounds like good advice, or this sounds like rubbish, or I don't really know, right? And blind, as I say, blind faith is not a strategy. But it is a challenge, and I think that the biggest challenge for businesses, particularly as they grow, is the business owner who started the business because he didn't want to answer to anybody else. As you get really big, realise, well, you do have lots of people you need to answer to. Normally the bank, when things get tough. But also, in terms of being a technician, maybe I don't enjoy being a manager. Maybe I don't, I want to be on the tools. I don't want to run 10 or 12 people or have management meetings or all that boring stuff or go through reports.
That's part of the problem, isn't it?
And the truth is, if you're not going to do it, someone's got to do it. And if you're not prepared to give the autonomy and authority over to someone else, which is often an issue, then no one is going to do it.
It's a good call. Very, very interesting stuff, and well done. And we'll talk no doubt about a lot more business stuff very, very shortly as well. You can be contacted at Stratosfear, which is spelt with FEAR on the end, as opposed to the up in the sky thing. So, Jamie, thanks for your time today.
No, thank you.
Excellent. So, Jamie Holroyd from Stratosfear, talking business matters. We have lots more coming up.
This is the Sattler.